Tonight, we're traveling somewhere very old. Long before highways carved across this land, long before cities or farms or fences, North America was a continent of giants, and the animals that hunted them were unlike anything alive today. This wasn't a violent place in the way we might imagine. It was a balanced one, a world where enormous predators and enormous prey spent millions of years learning how to exist together. There were cats here, larger than any living today, wolves that hunted in packs across territories so vast they would stretch across modern states, bears built not for foraging, but for confrontation, and yet the system held. For millions of years it held. The prey animals were not helpless. They had grown strong under this pressure, thick boned, armored, fast, and deeply aware. Survival here was not about escaping danger entirely. It was about reading the land, moving with the herd, knowing when to run and when to stand still. Into this system, humans arrived late, without claws or fangs, without size or raw strength. They entered environments already optimized for bringing down enormous mammals. Some predators here were capable of ending a hunt in seconds, overpowering animals far larger than themselves, and moving across territories so vast they reshaped entire regions simply by existing. But how did so many apex predators coexist on the same landscapes without collapsing the system? How did humans survive their arrival in ecosystems already tuned for hunting large bodies? And why did nearly all of these predators disappear in what amounts to a geological blink? Tonight, we'll walk slowly through this vanished world. We'll meet the hunters who shaped it and the animals who endured them. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. Your comments are one of my favorite parts of this sleepy little community. If this space brings you peace, a like or a subscribe helps others find their way here too. And if you're already subscribed, thank you. You're part of what makes this corner of the internet feel so calm. Now let your breath slow, let your shoulders soften, and together let us step softly into the continent that once belonged to giants. Ice Age North America often arrives in the imagination as a place locked beneath snow and silence, but the land itself tells a gentler and far more complex story. This was not a continent held in permanent winter. It breathed with seasons, shifted with rainfall, and carried warmth and cold in slow, patient cycles. Ice pressed down from the north, yes, but south of those great frozen sheets, the land opened wide. Across enormous distances, grasslands rolled outward like quiet seas. Tall grasses bent under steady winds, their roots gripping deep, dark soil, rich with stored energy. Forests spread along rivers and valleys, not thin or fragile, but dense and layered, with canopies that filtered sunlight into long green afternoons. Wetlands stitched these environments together, shallow waters flashing with movement, reeds whispering, mud marked by countless passing bodies. Rivers wandered freely, flooding their banks, retreating again, reshaping the land year by year with a patience no animal could resist. This variety mattered. Where landscapes change often, life learns to adapt. Where food appears in abundance, bodies grow large enough to hold it. Ice Age North America carried an unusual wealth of energy, not hidden or scarce, but visible everywhere. Great herds moved across the plains, feeding on grasses that returned stronger after each grazing. Forest edges hosted browsers and mixed feeders, animals built to strip leaves, snap branches, and move steadily for hours. Wetlands supported their own giants, slow moving but massive, drawing nourishment from plants that grew back faster than they could be consumed. The presence of so many large animals changed the rhythm of the land itself. Paths formed where bodies passed again and again, soil compacted beneath hooves and padded feet. Seeds traveled vast distances, caught in fur or carried through digestion. Nutrients spread outward from carcasses, feeding plants that would, in time, feed new generations of herbivores. Life circulated constantly, energy flowing from sun to plant to muscle, then back into the earth. In systems like this, size becomes efficient. A large body wastes less heat, stores more energy, and travels farther between meals. Strength reduces vulnerability. Height reaches food others cannot. Over time, the land favors those who can hold energy, not those who must constantly chase it. Ice Age North America rewarded mass, patience, and endurance. Where prey grows large and numerous, predators respond in kind, not through sudden leaps, but through long refinement. Muscles thicken, limbs lengthen or shorten depending on terrain. Senses sharpen toward movement, scent, and sound. Predators here did not need to survive on rare opportunity. Opportunity surrounded them. Herds passed predictably. River crossings funneled movement. Forest edges created moments of concealment and release. High energy ecosystems do not produce moderation, they amplify extremes. When food is plentiful, predators can afford specialization. Some grow faster, others stronger. Some invest in endurance, others in explosive power. Competition sharpens these differences because overlap becomes costly. Each successful hunter claims a role shaped by landscape, prey behavior, and energy flow. This abundance also allows time. Predators are not forced into constant desperation. They can wait, they can fail, and recover. This breathing room supports larger brains, longer lifespans, and complex behaviors passed down across generations. Young animals grow slowly, learning the land, the timing of herds, the dangers of rivers and forests. Knowledge accumulates quietly, season after season. The land itself reinforces this structure. Grasslands invite pursuit and stamina. Forest rewards stealth and control. Wetlands punish missteps and favor patience. Rivers divide territories and concentrate life at their edges. No single strategy dominates everywhere. The continent becomes a mosaic of hunting grounds, each selecting for different strengths. Over time, these pressures create predators that appear excessive when viewed in isolation, yet within this system, they fit. They are scaled to the energy beneath their feet, to the size of the bodies they hunt, to the distances they must travel to survive. Nothing here is accidental. Nothing is gentle, but nothing is wasteful either. This is the foundation, a continent rich enough to support giants, patient enough to shape them, and complex enough to keep them in balance for long stretches of time. The rules were written slowly, in grass and bone, in water and soil. For millions of years, the system held, and it is within this quiet, powerful world that the rules will soon be tested, bent, and finally broken, not by sudden catastrophe, but by change arriving from every direction at once. As the rhythms of this rich continent settled into place, one presence rose above the rest, not through spectacle, but through scale and consequence. Long before names or stories could soften it, a bear walked these lands whose shape alone altered the meaning of danger. Its fossils do not suggest a creature hiding in forests or lingering at the edges of human memory. They speak of something openly dominant, moving across open ground, with confidence written into bone. This was the short-faced bear, a giant whose proportions felt unfamiliar even among Ice Age animals. When it rose onto its hind legs, its height surpassed that of any living bear, not by exaggeration, but by simple geometry. Its limbs were long, its chest deep, its skull broad and forward-facing. The face itself appeared shortened, not delicate, but compact and forceful, as if designed to meet resistance head-on. Yet what truly separated this bear from its modern relatives was not size alone. Its body tells a quieter story about motion. The long legs were not built for shuffling through undergrowth or turning over logs in slow curiosity. They were built for covering ground. Muscle attachments along the limbs and shoulders suggest strength paired with stride, a frame shaped for speed rather than patience. This was not a bear that waited for opportunity to wander past. It was a bear that could close distance. Across the plains and open woodlands, this mattered deeply. The land offered visibility, but also exposure. Movement carried risk, and speed became a form of authority. The short faced bear could traverse wide territories, not as a desperate search for food, but as a natural extension of its design. Its range stretched across vast portions of the continent, crossing environments that would have limited less adaptable predators. Grasslands, river valleys, forest margins all fell within its reach. Because of this, its presence reshaped the behavior of everything around it. Other predators adjusted their timing and movement, avoiding overlap when possible. Prey herds altered routes, compressing into tighter formations or shifting grazing grounds. Even scavengers would have watched the horizon carefully, reading the land for signs of its approach. The bear did not need to hunt constantly to influence the ecosystem. Its potential was enough. Energy flowed differently where it walked. A kill made by such a creature was not a brief event, but a gathering point. Smaller carnivores arrived cautiously, waiting for space and safety. Birds descended from above, their shadows circling slowly. Nutrients spread outward into the soil, feeding plants that would support the next generation of herbivores. In this way, the bear became part of the landscape's pulse, not merely a consumer, but a distributor of energy across time. Its size also carried a different kind of authority. Large predators often rely on intimidation as much as pursuit. The short faced bear's sheer presence would have resolved conflicts without motion. Strength advertised openly reduces the need for constant confrontation. This allowed the bear to conserve energy, an important advantage even in abundant systems. Power used sparingly lasts longer. Understanding this animal changes how Ice Age North America must be imagined. The continent was not merely populated by many predators, but structured around some that operated on a scale unfamiliar today. The short faced bear was not an exception that slipped through evolutionary cracks. It was a product of the same rules that shaped the grasslands, the herds, and the rivers. Its existence confirms how much energy the system could support and how extreme specialization could become when resources allowed. Modern landscapes rarely offer space for such a creature. Fragmented habitats and reduced prey limit both movement and growth. But in this earlier world, openness and abundance worked together, allowing a bear to become something closer to a force than an animal. It connected distant regions through its range, influenced multiple food webs at once, and set a ceiling on what dominance looked like. Seen through this lens, Ice Age North America reveals itself not as a place of scattered dangers, but as a continent capable of sustaining beings that commanded it physically and ecologically. The short faced bear stands as proof of that capacity. Not a legend uncovered by chance, but a reminder etched into bone that the land once held enough room, enough food, and enough time to shape predators beyond anything that walks the earth today. Once such a presence moved across the land, sharing space with it became a defining condition of life. The short faced bear did not simply occupy a territory in the way modern predators do, with edges marked and defended in familiar patterns. Its scale altered the meaning of territory itself. Where many carnivores today move within boundaries measured in valleys or ranges, this bear's domain stretched across open plains and through river corridors, linking distant habitats into a single lived space. Its movements followed the flow of energy rather than fixed borders, tracing the paths of migrating herds and seasonal abundance. Compared to modern predators, the difference is striking. Wolves patrol in packs, lions in prides, bears alone, each shaped by limits imposed by food density and human altered landscapes. The short faced bear faced fewer such constraints. Prey was plentiful, movement was uninterrupted, and competition, though intense, was spread across wide ground. As a result, its territory expanded not because it needed more, but because the land allowed it. This created a predator whose presence could be felt across enormous distances, even when it was not seen. For prey, avoidance became an art refined over generations. Survival did not depend on outrunning the bear every time, but on reading the land well enough to avoid meeting it at all. Herds learned to move with caution through open areas, clustering tightly when crossing exposed ground. Individuals stayed alert to shifts in wind, to sudden silences among birds, to the distant movement of other animals reacting before danger arrived. Paths were chosen not only for food, but for visibility and escape. Size alone did not guarantee safety. Larger bodies carried more energy, but they also left deeper tracks and moved with a presence that traveled far through sound and vibration. Smaller animals learned to stay close to cover or to follow the movements of larger species, using their vigilance as an early warning system. Life became layered, each species tuned to the reactions of those around it, forming a living network of awareness that extended beyond any single set of senses. The landscape itself became a tool. Rivers were crossed at specific points where sightlines were long. Forest edges were favored over dense interiors, allowing animals to spot movement early. Rest happened in open ground, where approaching danger could be seen from afar. Night brought its own risks, and activity patterns shifted with moonlight and weather, not randomly, but in quiet response to what the land revealed. Within this system, mistakes carried weight. A moment of inattention, a poor choice of crossing, a lagging individual, these were not small errors. They altered lives and shaped behavior across entire populations. Over time, prey species grew more cautious, more coordinated, and in many cases, more formidable. Defensive adaptations were not reactions to a single predator, but to a world where dominance could arrive from many directions at once. For humans entering this landscape, the challenge was profound. They arrived without the physical advantages that defined apex hunters here. No claws to grip, no teeth built to crush, no mass to intimidate. Their bodies did not announce authority, and their presence did not command space. In a land structured around size and strength, this placed them at a disadvantage not easily overcome. Human survival depended on different strategies. Observation replaced confrontation. Patience stood in for speed. Knowledge of the land became more valuable than raw power. Early humans would have watched carefully, learning when to move and when to remain unseen. Fire offered protection, but only when used wisely. Tools extended reach, but only with planning and cooperation. Alone, a human was vulnerable. Together and attentive, they could persist, yet even then, they would not have ruled. The short-faced bear and its contemporaries defined the upper limits of dominance. Humans existed within those limits, navigating around them rather than through them. Their success lay not in overthrowing the system, but in fitting into its quieter spaces. Sharing land with such a predator meant living with constant awareness, not fear in a dramatic sense, but an unbroken attentiveness woven into daily life. Every movement mattered. Every decision carried consequence. The land rewarded those who learned its rhythms and punished those who ignored them. In this way, The presence of the short-faced bear shaped not only the animals it hunted, but the behavior of everything that lived within its reach, including the newest arrivals who would one day change the balance of the continent, though not yet, and not quickly. As the great bears shaped the land through presence and reach, another predator moved through this world in a very different way. Smilodon is often remembered as a larger version of a modern cat, an exaggeration of something familiar. That image feels comfortable, but it quietly misses the truth. This animal did not behave like the cats people know today, and it was not built to live by speed alone. Smilodon's body tells its story clearly. If one looks past the long teeth that tend to capture all attention, its proportions were unusual. The forelimbs were thick and heavily muscled, more powerful than those of any living cat relative to body size. Bones in the shoulders and arms were broad, shaped to absorb force rather than glide through motion. The chest was deep, the neck strong, and the spine built to brace rather than flex endlessly in pursuit. This was not the frame of an endurance runner. Modern big cats rely on chase. They close distance quickly, maintain speed, and use momentum to bring prey down. Smilodon followed a different path. Its strength lay in control. When it moved, it did so deliberately, staying low, conserving energy, and waiting for moments when distance could be closed instantly. The landscape offered many such moments. Tall grasses, broken ground, forest edges, and riverbanks all provided cover and interruption. Smilodon did not need open space. It thrived where visibility fractured. The forelimbs were the key. Once contact was made, escape became unlikely. Those arms could grapple, pin, and destabilize animals that outweighed the cat itself. Prey that relied on mass or momentum found themselves suddenly fixed in place, balance lost, breath pressed from the chest. Only then did the famous teeth matter. They were not tools for prolonged struggle, but for brief, precise work. A carefully placed bite ended resistance quickly, reducing risk to the predator. This method demanded patience and accuracy. A failed strike carried consequences. Smilodon could not afford extended fights or long pursuits. Fossil bones show signs of healed injuries, evidence of a life where close contact was unavoidable and survival depended on resilience as much as skill. Each hunt was a moment of commitment. There was no testing the prey from a distance. Once the decision was made, everything followed. Because of this, encounters were sudden. Prey did not experience long warning chases or distant pursuit. Danger arrived in silence, followed by impact. Herds could pass through an area for days without incident, only for a single moment of separation or hesitation to become final. The environment encouraged this pattern. Grasses whispered, shadows shifted, and the ground itself absorbed sound. Smilodon blended into these spaces, not as a blur of motion, but as a presence waiting to become unavoidable. This hunting style reshaped prey behavior. Animals learned to stay close, to move together, and to avoid narrowing paths where ambush favored the hunter. Vigilance focused not on distant movement, but on nearby stillness, a shadow that did not shift, a silence where birds should call. These signs mattered more than speed. Survival depended on reading subtle changes rather than reacting to obvious threats. For humans, this made the landscape especially unforgiving. Smilodon did not recognize people as something new or fragile. To a predator evolved to subdue large animals with precision, a small, upright figure moving slowly through grass or forest edge presented little challenge. Humans lacked the mass to resist grappling and the speed to escape once contact began. Awareness and avoidance were the only reliable protections. Smilodon's presence adds another layer to the understanding of Ice Age North America. This was not a land ruled by simple hierarchies of strength or speed. It was a place where different forms of dominance overlapped, each tuned to specific conditions. The bear commanded space through size and reach. Smilodon controlled moments, narrowing time and distance until escape disappeared. Seeing Smilodon as merely a large cat softens its reality. It was something more exacting, a predator shaped for decisive encounters, built to end hunts swiftly and without spectacle. In a world already heavy with danger, this precision made the land feel even tighter, even less forgiving. Life moved forward carefully, guided by attention and restraint, because some threats did not announce themselves until it was already too late. Across this continent, danger did not announce itself with noise or pursuit. It arrived quietly, shaped by a way of life where waiting mattered more than chasing. Ambush was not a tactic used occasionally. It was the foundation of survival for many predators, woven into the land itself and reflected in how every other creature moved through it. Ambush ecology begins with patience. In landscapes where food is abundant but competition is fierce, conserving energy becomes as important as gaining it. Predators learn to let the land do much of the work. Tall grasses softened outlines, broken terrain interrupted sightlines, forest edges offered shadow and cover, riverbanks narrowed movement, guiding prey into predictable paths. The environment created moments where distance collapsed suddenly, and predators adapted to exploit those moments with precision. In such a system, visibility could not be trusted. Open ground appeared safe, but it offered little warning when danger moved from stillness to action in a heartbeat. A predator hidden low in grass or standing motionless among trees blended seamlessly into the background. Movement was often the first sign, not sound. By the time prey registered that shift, the space between bodies had already vanished. This made vigilance a constant state rather than a response. Prey animals did not relax simply because they could see far. They scanned continuously, not only for motion, but for absence. A missing bird call, a silence where insects had been active moments before, the way wind bent grass differently in one narrow patch. These details carried meaning, passed down through instinct and learned behavior, shaping how herds paused, turned, or tightened together. Living under this pressure reshaped minds as well as bodies. Animals evolved not only stronger limbs or thicker hides, but heightened awareness. Attention sharpened, reaction times shortened. Social behaviors became more coordinated. Individuals watched each other closely, reading tension and sudden shifts in posture. A single startled movement could ripple through an entire group, sending dozens of bodies surging together without hesitation. Fear, in this world, was not panic, it was structure. It organized daily routines and seasonal movements. Feeding happened quickly. Rest occurred in places chosen carefully for visibility and escape. Young animals learned early to mirror adult behavior, absorbing caution through repetition rather than instruction. Those that failed to adapt did not leave descendants. The constant presence of ambush predators also shaped how prey experienced time. Moments stretched longer when standing still. Short distances carried weight. Crossing a river or entering tall grass required collective focus. Life unfolded in careful increments, measured not by abundance alone, but by risk. Even in times of plenty, attention never loosened completely. For humans, this environment demanded a similar transformation. Entering a land governed by ambush required learning new ways of seeing, Upright posture offered broader vision, but also made concealment difficult. Humans learned to move deliberately, to read tracks and disturbances, to recognize patterns of animal behavior that hinted at unseen threats. Fire provided light and deterrence, but it also revealed presence, narrowing options rather than expanding them. Human groups adapted by leaning into cooperation. Multiple eyes scanned while others worked. Camps were placed where sightlines extended naturally. Tools became extensions of reach and protection, allowing distance where bodies alone could not. Still, survival depended less on dominance and more on awareness. Humans endured by fitting into the gaps between dangers, not by eliminating them. Ambush ecology created a world where certainty was rare, safety was temporary and conditional. Even dominant predators lived with caution, aware that injury could mean death in a system that favored precision over endurance. This shared vulnerability tied the ecosystem together. Every creature existed within a web of attention, each movement influencing the behavior of others. Over generations, this pressure refined the balance of the land. Predators that struck too often exhausted prey. Those that waited too long starved. Prey that panicked wasted energy. Those that ignored risk vanished. What remained was a system tuned finely to restraint and timing, where survival favored those who understood when to act and when to remain still. Death, in such a place, did not arrive with drama. It came swiftly, often unseen until the final moment. This reality shaped the psychology of the entire continent. Life moved forward quietly, guided by constant observation and subtle cues. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, every rustle and shadow carrying weight. In this way, Ice Age North America became a place where awareness was as vital as strength and stillness carried as much meaning as motion. The absence of warning was not a flaw of the system. It was the system, as the rhythms of ambush and awareness shaped daily life. Another presence moved through this world with a different kind of authority. The American lion did not rely on concealment in the same way as some of its contemporaries, nor did it need the sheer reach of the great bears. Its dominance came from power expressed openly, carried in muscle and mass, and reinforced by a body built to confront the largest lives this continent could offer. This lion stood larger than its modern African relatives, not just in length, but in weight and frame. Its chest was broad, its shoulders heavy with muscle, and its limbs thick enough to absorb impact without faltering. When it moved, the ground felt it. This was not a creature shaped for endless sprinting across open plains. It was shaped to meet resistance directly and overcome it. Ice Age North America offered prey that demanded such strength. Mammoths moved slowly but carried immense mass. Giant bison traveled in dense groups, their combined force capable of stopping smaller predators outright. Large horses, camels, and ground sloths filled the land, each presenting a challenge measured not by speed alone, but by size, momentum, and defense. Bringing down such animals required the ability to withstand impact, to grip and hold, and to apply force long enough for exhaustion to take its quiet effect. In this environment, speed mattered less than control. A brief chase could close distance, but the true test began after contact. The American lion's strength allowed it to anchor itself against struggling prey, muscles braced, claws embedded, weight pressed forward with patience rather than haste. Energy flowed differently in these encounters. Instead of explosive sprints followed by retreat, hunts became measured contests of endurance and leverage. The land reinforced this approach. Grasslands were vast, but broken by rivers, rises, and patches of uneven ground. Forest margins offered moments where distance narrowed naturally. Prey could not always flee cleanly, and turning too sharply risked collision or loss of balance. In these spaces, power asserted itself quietly. Once the lion committed, escape grew unlikely. This strength also shaped social behavior. The American lion is believed to have lived and hunted in groups at times, allowing multiple bodies to apply force together. Cooperation magnified power, not speed. Several animals working in unison could isolate the largest prey, prevent escape, and wear down resistance without rushing. The hunt became a shared effort, guided by timing and position rather than prolonged pursuit. For other predators, the presence of such a hunter altered patterns. Smaller carnivores adjusted their ranges, feeding times, and behaviors to avoid direct competition. Scavengers followed at a distance, waiting for opportunity after the lion's work was done. Even the great bears, dominant in their own way, would have treated these lions with caution when paths crossed. Strength commands respect across species. Prey animals responded accordingly. Herds grew tighter, movement became more synchronized, and younger or weaker individuals stayed closer to the center. The land filled with signs of vigilance, not only toward sudden ambush, but toward open confrontations where escape was limited. Life became a balance between movement and restraint, between feeding and remaining within the safety of numbers. For humans, the American lion represented a different kind of danger than stealth or surprise. Its presence was often visible. Tracks were large and unmistakable. Kills were dramatic and left clear signs. Yet visibility did not mean safety. Power like this reduced options. A lion capable of bringing down the continent's largest animals did not need confusion or concealment to succeed. Avoidance, distance, and timing were the only reliable strategies. Human groups would have learned to read the aftermath of hunts, to recognize areas recently claimed, and to shift movement accordingly. Fire and noise offered some protection, but they did not erase risk. The American lion occupied a tier of dominance that humans did not challenge directly. Survival depended on coexistence rather than conquest. Understanding this predator reshapes the image of Ice Age North America once more. This was not a land where speed alone decided survival. It was a place where mass and strength carried lasting advantage, where the ability to hold ground mattered as much as the ability to cross it. The American lion embodied that rule. It stood as a living measure of how much power the land could sustain and how openly that power could be expressed. In the presence of such a hunter, the continent revealed another of its truths. Danger was not always hidden. Sometimes it walked in full view, steady and unchallenged, shaping the behavior of everything around it simply by existing. As these dominant hunters moved through the continent, their lives did not unfold in isolation. The land was vast, yet it was not divided neatly. Ranges overlapped, paths crossed, and the presence of one apex predator did not exclude another. Instead, Ice Age North America became a place where several of the most powerful carnivores to ever exist shared the same ground, often within the same seasons, sometimes within the same valleys. The short-faced bear ranged widely, following energy across open plains and river corridors. Smilodon favored places where concealment tightened, distance, forest edges, broken terrain, and the narrowing spaces where movement slowed. The American lion moved with strength across open ground, capable of confronting the largest prey head-on. Their territories were not sealed compartments. They intersected and shifted as prey moved and seasons changed. What allowed this to persist was not peace, but structure. Each predator occupied a different rhythm within the same world. Time separated them as much as space. Some hunted by day, others leaned into low light or shifting weather. Some relied on ambush, others on force and cooperation. Even when they targeted similar prey, the method and moment of attack differed enough to reduce constant conflict. Energy abundance made this possible. The land supported enormous herds, and death returned nutrients quickly to the system. A single large kill could feed multiple species in succession, first the hunter, then scavengers, then smaller carnivores, and finally the soil itself. Nothing was wasted. This steady flow softened competition, allowing overlap without immediate collapse. Behavior also played a role. Dominant predators did not seek confrontation without reason. Injury carried risk, even for the powerful. Avoidance became a shared language. Tracks were read, scents were noted. The presence of another apex hunter shifted movement patterns subtly rather than violently. One predator arrived, another adjusted, and the land absorbed the change. Young animals learned these boundaries early. Through instinct and experience, they absorbed the signals of who moved, where, and when. The ecosystem functioned like a layered conversation, each species responding to the others without constant contact. Balance emerged not from equality, but from restraint. This arrangement, however, rested on precision. It required stable prey populations, predictable migrations, and landscapes that offered enough space for separation. When those conditions held, the system endured. For long stretches of time, it did more than endure, it flourished. Yet this balance was narrow. High specialization brought efficiency, but it also reduced flexibility. Each apex predator depended on certain conditions being met. The short-faced bear required wide movement and abundant large prey. Smilodon depended on concealment and moments of close contact. The American lion relied on strength applied to massive bodies. If any part of this structure weakened, the effects rippled outward. Climate shifts altered vegetation. Changes in rainfall reshaped grasslands and wetlands. Prey distributions shifted gradually, then unevenly. Migration routes bent or broke. When prey became less predictable, overlap increased, not by design, but by necessity. Competition sharpened. Encounters grew more frequent. At the same time, new pressures entered the system. Humans moved through the same landscapes, not yet dominant, but persistent. They altered patterns in small ways at first, redirecting herds, adding new signals to the land, taking animals that once fed the great predators. These changes did not collapse the system immediately. Instead, they tightened it. Ecosystems that support multiple apex predators operate close to their limits. They are powerful, but sensitive. Each species occupies a narrow band of possibility, shaped precisely by energy, space, and time. When one element shifts, others must respond quickly or not at all. Ice Age North America held this complexity for thousands of years. The land balanced giants against giants, patience against power, concealment against force. It was a rare arrangement, one that modern landscapes no longer support. Its fragility was not a flaw, but a consequence of its richness. In this shared world, dominance was never absolute. Every apex predator existed within reach of another. Survival required constant adjustment, even at the highest levels. The land did not belong to one hunter alone. It belonged to the system that held them all, so long as its delicate rules remained intact. As the great solitary hunters and powerful ambush predators shaped the land in their own ways, another force moved through Ice Age North America with a different rhythm altogether. Dire wolves did not rely on sudden silence or overwhelming size. Their strength came from persistence, coordination, and an ability to turn time itself into a weapon. Dire wolves resembled modern wolves at a glance, but their bodies told a heavier story. Their skulls were broader, their teeth thicker, and their jaws built to withstand and deliver immense force. Where modern wolves balance strength with flexibility, dire wolves leaned fully into power. Their bites were designed not only to puncture, but to crush, capable of breaking through thick hide and bone again and again without weakening. This allowed them to feed efficiently on large, resilient prey even when competition arrived. Yet their most defining trait was not found in bone alone. It lived in numbers. Dire wolves hunted together, not as loose associations, but as tightly coordinated units. Packs moved across the land like extended bodies, each individual responding to the movements of the others with practiced ease. A single wolf could harry prey, but a pack could shape its path, guiding movement subtly, pressing without rushing, never allowing true rest. This style of hunting unfolded slowly. Dire wolves did not depend on a single decisive moment. They depended on pressure applied steadily over distance and time. A herd would begin to move, then quicken, then break apart. Individuals that stumbled or lagged drew attention. Wolves shifted positions, some pressing from behind, others flanking, maintaining proximity without committing fully. The goal was not immediate collapse, but fatigue. Exhaustion changes everything. Muscles weaken, coordination falters, breathing becomes shallow and uneven. In large animals, mass that once provided safety turns into a burden. Each step demands more energy than the last. Dire wolves understood this, not consciously, but through instinct shaped over countless hunts. They allowed prey to wear itself down, conserving their own strength for the final stages. This approach worked especially well in a land filled with large herbivores. Bison, horses, and other massive animals could outrun wolves briefly, but not indefinitely. The open terrain offered few places to hide, and rivers or uneven ground slowed escape further. Dire wolves adjusted their pace, keeping pressure constant but manageable, always present, always closing the distance just enough to prevent recovery. Once prey began to fail, the pack closed in. Strong jaws found purchase. Multiple bites landed not in a rush, but in waves, each wolf contributing force where it was most effective. The animal at the center of this ring faced not a single opponent, but a coordinated system. Resistance ended not through a dramatic strike, but through inevitability. This method shaped the ecosystem in quiet ways. Prey animals adapted by staying in larger groups, rotating individuals toward the center, and avoiding long chases whenever possible. Movement became more conservative. Migration routes shifted to minimize exposure to prolonged pursuit. Even other predators took note, aware that a pack of dire wolves could contest a carcass through sheer persistence. For humans, dire wolves represented a unique challenge. Their numbers reduced the effectiveness of intimidation. Fire and noise could deter individuals, but packs learned quickly, adjusting distances rather than retreating outright. Human groups traveling through wolf territory had to remain vigilant over long periods, not just at moments of ambush. Fatigue became dangerous. Separation from the group invited attention. Dire wolves also altered the meaning of competition. Unlike solitary hunters that avoided conflict, packs could hold ground through unity. This allowed them to thrive alongside larger predators, filling a different role in the ecosystem. They did not need to overpower the strongest animals alone. They needed only to outlast them. Relentlessness shaped their success. In a land already heavy with danger, dire wolves added a layer that was difficult to escape. There was no sudden silence before attack, no clear signal that danger had passed. Pressure remained until the hunt concluded or conditions changed. Through this steady force, dire wolves became a defining presence of Ice Age North America. They remind us that survival here was not decided solely by size or surprise. Sometimes it was decided by endurance, by cooperation, and by the quiet power of never letting go. By the time all of these hunters shared the land, escape itself became a limited resource. The world moved under constant pressure, not as a momentary threat, but as a steady condition woven into every hour of life. For prey species, safety was never a stable state. It was a brief alignment of awareness, position, and timing, and even then, it could vanish without warning. In such a landscape, running was not always the answer. Speed offered an advantage only when space was open and uninterrupted, and even then, it demanded energy that could not always be spared. Long chases carried risk. A sprint might save a life once, but repeated effort drained reserves needed for survival through colder seasons or leaner months. Over time, many animals followed a different path. Instead of becoming faster, they became larger. Size changes the rules of pursuit. A larger body carries momentum that smaller predators struggle to stop. Thick muscle and dense bone absorb impact. Height extends vision above grasses and low brush, allowing danger to be detected earlier. In herds, size compounds. Many large bodies, moving together, present a barrier that is difficult to penetrate without commitment and coordination. This did not make large animals invulnerable, but it shifted the balance of risk. Mass also stores energy. Fat and muscle serve as reserves during times of stress, allowing animals to endure injury, illness, or periods of reduced feeding. In a land where predators applied pressure continuously, this buffering mattered. Speed fades quickly when exhaustion sets in. Strength and endurance persist longer. Herding behavior amplified these advantages. Large animals clustered together, moving as a single unit. Individuals rotated positions, allowing the tired to recover and the young to remain protected. Movement became deliberate rather than frantic. Sudden flight was avoided, unless absolutely necessary, because panic scattered protection and drew attention. Yet size came with cost. Larger bodies were easier to detect. Movement left deeper tracks. Sounds traveled farther. Living at scale meant being noticed, not only by predators, but by everything else sharing the land. There was no hiding completely. Instead, survival relied on visibility paired with readiness. This shaped behavior in subtle ways. Animals paused often, scanning not just for obvious movement, but for changes in the environment. Feeding occurred in stages, heads lifting regularly. Rest was brief and strategic. Sleep happened in shifts, with some members remaining alert while others recovered. Life slowed, not from ease, but from necessity. Smaller species adapted differently. Speed and agility mattered more, but so did timing. Many learned to move during low light, to use cover creatively, or to stay close to larger animals, benefiting from their awareness and deterrence. Some species adjusted their diets, feeding in places less attractive to predators. Others altered reproductive strategies, producing more offspring to offset losses. Across all of this, pressure shaped perception. The world was read constantly as a field of signals: the rustle of grass, the flight of birds, the sudden stillness of insects, all carried meaning. Prey species evolved senses tuned to these cues, processing information rapidly and responding almost before conscious thought could form. Living meant listening as much as moving. For humans, this reality demanded humility. Early people did not arrive as masters of the land, but as learners. They observed animal behavior closely, understanding that the reactions of prey often revealed the presence of unseen predators. Humans followed herds not only for food, but for safety, using the vigilance of animals as an early warning system. Camps were placed where visibility extended naturally, and movement followed paths that minimized exposure. Even so, danger remained close. Being noticed was unavoidable. Humans, like all creatures here, left traces. Smoke rose, footprints marked soil, voices carried. Survival depended on minimizing signals and choosing moments carefully. Loudness was replaced by coordination, speed by planning. Escape was rarely an option once a threat committed. This constant pressure did not create a world of chaos. It created a world of balance, held under tension. Every species adjusted, finding a narrow space where survival was possible. The land supported abundance, but demanded payment in attention and restraint. A world where escape was rare was not a world without life. It was a world shaped by awareness. Bodies grew strong rather than swift. Minds stayed alert rather than relaxed. Movement became meaningful, measured against risk. In this place, living meant being seen, heard, and felt by others. Survival was not about disappearing, but about enduring within a system that never stopped watching. As the land pressed life into careful movement, water introduced a different kind of danger. Forests offered concealment and warning in equal measure, but rivers removed those balances entirely. Along their edges, the rules that governed the plains and woodlands dissolved, replaced by a space where visibility failed, footing vanished, and control shifted instantly from prey to predator. Ice Age rivers were not narrow channels tucked politely into banks. They spread wide, braided, and slow in places, fast and swollen in others. Seasonal melt and rain reshaped them constantly, carving new paths, collapsing old ones, and leaving behind soft margins that gave way under weight. Vegetation grew thick along these edges, fed by rich sediment and steady moisture. Tall reeds, low branches, and tangled roots blurred the boundary between land and water, turning shorelines into places of uncertainty. Within these zones lived giant crocodilians, animals perfectly adapted to stillness and sudden force. Their bodies lay low in the water, eyes and nostrils just breaking the surface, armored backs disguised by drifting plants and reflected sky. They did not chase. They waited. Time passed differently for them, measured not in urgency, but in opportunity. Water made ambush effortless. Sound traveled poorly across its surface. Movement distorted perception. Depth was difficult to judge. A calm stretch could hide sudden drop-offs or deep channels where footing disappeared without warning. When a large animal entered the water, its strength drained away almost immediately. Legs that carried weight easily on land struggled against resistance. Balance faltered, speed vanished. Crossing a river required commitment. Once in the water, retreat was slow and clumsy. Herds hesitated at banks, gathering tightly, watching for subtle signs that something below might shift. Often they waited long periods, choosing moments carefully, entering together to reduce individual risk. Even then, danger remained. Crocodilians exploited these moments precisely. A sudden surge, a powerful tail, jaws closing with force directed upward and inward. Prey was pulled under before resistance could form. Panic spread instantly, but water scattered coordination. Individuals collided, slipped, or turned back into deeper channels. The river itself became a weapon, amplifying every mistake. Unlike forest ambushes, river attacks offered little warning and no pursuit. There was no chase to escape, no distance to create safety. The encounter was brief and final. Death came beneath the surface, unseen by those who escaped, leaving only disturbance behind, ripples fading back into calm. These dangers reshaped behavior across the continent. Migration routes bent to avoid wide crossings. Herds followed established fords, where visibility was better and footing more predictable. Even then, caution never fully relaxed. Animals approached water slowly, scanning for patterns that did not belong. Feeding near rivers happened in short intervals, with constant attention to the surface. The presence of water predators also affected other hunters. Terrestrial carnivores avoided lingering near riverbanks unless conditions favored them. Carcasses near water attracted competition and risk. Scavengers approached carefully, aware that death in this environment could come from below rather than around. For humans, rivers were both necessity and threat. Water sustained life, shaped travel, and offered resources, but it demanded respect. Early people learned to read river behavior, noting changes in flow, vegetation, and animal activity. Camps were placed back from the edge. Crossings happened at familiar points, often during daylight, with groups moving together. Tools and fire offered little protection here. A crocodilian attack left no space for reaction. Humans adapted by minimizing exposure, choosing when and where to enter water, and learning from the movements of other animals. Still, the risk remained constant. Rivers did not forgive misjudgment. This made water crossings moments of shared vulnerability. Even apex predators hesitated. Bears paused at banks. Lions watched carefully before entering. Wolves tested shallows before committing. The river commanded caution from all who depended on land. In this world, forests allowed at least the illusion of escape. Trees offered cover. Distance could be created. Rivers stripped those comforts away. They reduced life to physics and timing, to buoyancy and force. Strength mattered less than position. Awareness mattered less than circumstance. Rivers shaped the continent not only by carving land, but by shaping behavior. They divided territories, redirected movement, and claimed lives quietly and efficiently. In a landscape already dense with danger, water added a final reminder that survival depended not only on what could be seen, but on what waited unseen beneath the surface. As rivers claimed lives silently and forests hid danger in shadow, the sky added its own presence to the world below. It did not roar or rush. It watched, high above the plains and valleys. Enormous birds traced slow circles, their wings stretching wider than any living bird today. These were the teratorns, giants of the air whose lives were tied not to the hunt itself, but to its aftermath. Teratorns were not delicate creatures lifted by chance currents. Their bones were light but strong, their chests deep with muscle, their wings built to ride rising air for hours without effort. From far above, they scanned the land for signs invisible to those on the ground, a gathering of animals, a sudden stillness, the subtle rearrangement of movement that followed death. When a kill occurred, the landscape changed. Birds fell silent, smaller animals retreated. Blood darkened grass or soaked into soil. These signals traveled upward. The teratorns responded not with speed, but with certainty. A slow turn of wings, a steady descent. The sky narrowed its focus. After a predator finished feeding, it rarely stayed. Risk increased quickly at a carcass. Smell carried far. Competition arrived. For terrestrial hunters, remaining meant defending a resource that would soon attract others stronger or more numerous. Many fed quickly, then withdrew, leaving behind what they could not consume. That moment belonged to the scavengers. Territorns descended in numbers, their shadows stretching long across the ground. They landed with weight and presence, powerful legs absorbing impact, hooked beaks ready to tear through hide and sinew. Smaller birds kept distance. Even large predators approached cautiously. These were not passive cleaners. They could claim space through size alone. Scavenging was not secondary survival here. It was an integral layer of the ecosystem. Large kills produced more food than a single predator could use. Territorns turned what remained into movement, spreading nutrients across the landscape. They fed, then lifted again, carrying energy outward in their bodies, fertilizing distant ground through droppings and decay. Death became a point of redistribution. Yet this also meant that death drew attention. A kill rarely ended with the fall of the prey. It began a sequence. Wolves arrived, testing boundaries. Lions returned, watching from a distance. Bears followed scent trails that cut across miles. The presence of territorns overhead signaled opportunity and risk to everything below. Their circling announced that something had changed. For prey animals, this created another layer of awareness. The sky was read as carefully as the ground. Birds gathering or descending altered movement. Herds shifted direction, sensing danger not from a visible predator, but from the promise of one. Even humans learned to read these signs, recognizing that the attention of the sky often marked places to avoid. The Territorns themselves lived between worlds. They required open spaces for takeoff, cliffs or high ground for nesting, and constant access to large carcasses. Their survival depended on the success of land predators. In turn, their presence shaped how long predators stayed and how they behaved after feeding. A world without scavengers would have looked very different. Death, then, was never quiet. It echoed upward and outward. A single fallen animal altered behavior across species and distances. Danger clustered. Competition intensified. What began as an isolated event became a gathering point, drawing attention from land, water, and air alike. For humans, this meant that approaching a carcass carried immense risk. What appeared to be food could quickly become a trap. Scavengers arrived from above, predators from all directions. Timing mattered. Awareness mattered. Often, avoidance was the safest choice. The sky's involvement completed the system. Predators hunted, prey fell, scavengers arrived, nutrients spread, life continued. This cycle did not pause for reflection. It moved steadily, shaped by energy and necessity rather than mercy. In Ice Age North America, danger was not confined to one direction. It rose from rivers, hid in forests, moved across plains, and watched from above. The Territorns remind us that survival here required attention in every dimension. Even after death, even after silence returned to the ground, the sky remained alert, carrying the story forward on vast, patient wings. As all these forces moved together, the continent settled into a rhythm that endured, not because it was gentle, and not because it spared those who lived within it, but because it functioned with remarkable consistency. For millions of years, Ice Age North America sustained its complex web of predators and prey, adjusting slowly and steadily rather than breaking apart. This persistence can be mistaken for harmony, yet it carried no promise of safety. Stability in this world did not come from balance in the modern sense. It arose from limits understood through experience. Predators hunted only as often as energy allowed. Prey reproduced only as resources permitted. Death removed the weak and the unlucky, but it also cleared space for those who followed. The land neither favored nor punished, it responded. Many of the animals that lived here carried long lifespans. Growth was slow. Maturity came after years rather than seasons. Large bodies required time to form, and energy invested in survival outweighed energy spent on rapid reproduction. A mammoth did not replace itself quickly. Neither did a giant sloth or a great bear. Life advanced carefully, with each generation built on the endurance of the last. This pace shaped behavior. Animals did not live fast and vanish quickly. They learned, they remembered routes, seasons, and dangers. Knowledge accumulated across years, carried in movement patterns and social structures rather than words. A herd's path reflected not only geography, but memory of loss and survival etched into instinct. Predators followed similar rhythms. Long intervals passed between successful hunts. Injury could end a life slowly. Recovery demanded time and quiet. This encouraged restraint. Killing was precise, not wasteful. A failed hunt meant waiting, not compensation through excess. Every strike mattered. Within this framework, there was no room for mercy. Mercy implies choice without consequence, but here, consequence defined every action. A predator that hesitated risked starvation. Prey that delayed response risked death. Even scavengers operated within narrow margins. Arriving too early or too late could prove fatal. The system rewarded accuracy, not kindness. This absence of mercy did not produce chaos. It produced clarity. Each species occupied a role shaped by energy flow and time. No animal hunted for sport. No prey moved without reason. Violence was not emotional. It was functional. The land supported life by recycling it, again and again, without pause. Humans entered this system as observers first, participants second. They encountered a world already refined by long testing. There were no empty roles waiting to be filled. Every niche carried competition. Every mistake carried weight. Survival demanded alignment with the existing rhythms rather than resistance to them. Over time, humans learned restraint as well. They did not overwhelm the land immediately. They adapted slowly, absorbing lessons written into animal behavior and landscape features. Tools were made to conserve energy. Fire was used carefully. Cooperation replaced brute force. Even so, humans did not soften the system. They joined it. This endurance, stretching across millions of years, can appear impressive from a distance. Yet, it came at a cost, measured in constant loss. Stability did not mean populations thrived without interruption. It meant that declines and recoveries occurred within predictable bounds. The system tolerated fluctuation, but not excess. Nothing evolved here to protect the weak out of sympathy. Protection came from structure. Herds guarded young because it preserved the group. Predators avoided unnecessary conflict because injury threatened survival. These behaviors were efficient, not compassionate. In such a world, life continued because it had to, not because it was gentle. The land did not seek to create monsters or victims. It shaped organisms capable of enduring its rules. Over generations, those rules became invisible, accepted as the only way existence could unfold. For millions of years, this system worked. It held together under pressure, adjusting slowly, resisting collapse through precision rather than force. Its longevity stands as evidence not of kindness, but of effectiveness. Ice Age North America was not built to comfort its inhabitants. It was built to function, and for a long time, it did so without hesitation. For a long time, the continent moved within familiar boundaries. Seasons changed, but they did so within ranges life had learned to expect. Ice advanced and retreated slowly. Grasslands expanded, then narrowed, then returned again. Rivers shifted their courses, yet remained reliable enough to anchor migration and memory. Within this rhythm, the great system endured. Then the climate began to loosen its grip on predictability. Ice Age North America was never static, but now its changes became sharper, less patient. Temperatures swung more abruptly. Cold periods arrived faster and lingered unevenly. Warmer intervals followed, but not long enough for full recovery. The great ice sheets breathed in shorter, heavier cycles, advancing southward, then pulling back again before the land could fully adjust. These shifts altered the ground beneath every step. Grasslands dried in some regions and flooded in others. Forests crept into open spaces, then thinned again as cold returned. Wetlands appeared where none had existed, while familiar watering sites vanished. Rivers swelled unpredictably with meltwater, then shrank into braided channels that changed from year to year. For plants, adaptation required time. For animals, it required movement. Migration routes lengthened, bent, or fractured. Herds that once followed reliable paths found themselves crossing unfamiliar terrain, encountering new obstacles and fewer safe resting places. The landscape no longer offered the same assurances it once had. Large prey felt this pressure first. Big bodies depend on stability. They require vast amounts of food, steady access to water, and predictable seasons to replenish energy reserves. When grasslands shifted or shortened, feeding windows narrowed. When cold lingered, plants returned more slowly. When drought struck, recovery took longer. Each change alone was survivable. Together, they tightened margins. Slow reproduction compounded the problem. Large animals did not replace losses quickly. Calves required years to mature. A single harsh season could reduce numbers that took generations to rebuild. As climate swings repeated, recovery time disappeared. Movement increased stress further. Longer migrations demanded more energy. Crossing unfamiliar ground increased exposure to predators. Rivers altered crossing points, forcing herds into bottlenecks where danger concentrated. Animals arrived at feeding grounds tired, thinner, and less coordinated than before. Predators noticed these changes immediately. Weakened prey moved differently. Injuries accumulated. Younger and older individuals lagged behind. Hunts became more efficient, not because predators grew stronger, but because prey had less strength to give. This imbalance rippled outward. As large prey declined, predators faced their own pressures. Hunts took longer, competition increased, scavenging grew more common. The system that once absorbed loss smoothly began to stretch. Smaller animals adapted more quickly. Shorter lifespans allowed faster reproduction. Flexible diets opened new opportunities. Some species expanded into spaces vacated by giants. Others retreated into refuges where conditions remained stable longer. Humans, too, adjusted. Mobility became an advantage. Tools changed subtly. Fire use increased in importance as cold intensified and food grew less reliable. Human groups followed shifting herds, sometimes arriving after the landscape had already changed again. Through all of this, the land continued to function, but differently. Familiar patterns blurred. The signals animals relied on grew less consistent. A route that had worked for generations failed within a lifetime. Memory became less reliable as a guide. The pressure on large prey did not announce itself as catastrophe. It arrived as accumulation, slightly less grass, slightly longer winters, slightly harder crossings. Over time, these small losses compounded into vulnerability. This was not a sudden collapse, it was a narrowing. A system once buffered by abundance and stability now operated closer to its limits. Every shift mattered more than before. Every loss echoed longer. As the climate continued its uneven turning, the continent entered a new phase of its story. The land still held power, but its generosity became selective. Those best suited to adjust quickly found space to persist. Those built for a steadier world carried weight that now worked against them. The rules were not broken yet, but they were changing, quietly and relentlessly, reshaping a continent that had long favored giants into one that no longer guaranteed their place. As the climate continued its uneven turning, the largest predators felt the change most sharply. For millions of years, their size had been an advantage, granting strength, reach, and authority over the land. Now, that same size began to narrow their options. The giants had no margin for error, and the world around them was becoming less forgiving. Megacarnivores live close to the edge, even in stable times. Their bodies demand constant fuel. Massive muscles require steady energy to maintain warmth, movement, and healing. Long limbs and heavy frames burn calories even at rest. A large predator does not simply hunt to eat, it hunts to sustain a machine that never truly powers down. In earlier ages, the land provided enough to support this cost. Large prey moved in predictable patterns. Kills, though not frequent, were sufficient. Recovery followed hardship. The system absorbed loss. But as prey numbers thinned and migrations shifted, the balance tightened. A failed hunt now carried more weight than before. Missing a single opportunity meant dipping into energy reserves that took weeks or months to rebuild. Injury, once survivable with rest and abundance, became dangerous. Healing slowed when food was scarce. A limp lingered longer. Strength returned unevenly. Each weakness compounded the next. Size also reduced flexibility. Smaller predators could switch prey, shift territory, or alter behavior quickly. Giants could not. Their bodies were tuned to specific targets, prey large enough to justify the energy spent hunting. When those targets declined, alternatives rarely compensated. Chasing smaller animals wasted energy. Competing with more agile predators increased risk. Waiting extended hunger. As seasons grew harsher, timing mattered more. A delayed migration, a drought that shortened grazing, a cold snap that lingered too long. These changes did not need to be dramatic. They only needed to arrive together. One poor season reduced prey condition, the next reduced prey numbers. For megacarnivores, the window to recover narrowed dangerously. Young predators suffered first. Learning to hunt required time and opportunity. In lean periods, adults claimed most successful kills, leaving little for those still developing skill. Mortality rose quietly. Fewer reached maturity. Population strength weakened from within. Even established adults faced risk. Territories expanded as prey grew scarce, forcing longer travel between hunts. Energy spent moving replaced energy gained feeding. Encounters with rivals increased. Conflict rose. Injury followed. The system fed back on itself, amplifying strain. This vulnerability was not obvious from the outside. Fossils do not record hunger easily. They do not show the narrowing of margins or the accumulation of near misses. But the pattern is written in disappearance. Species that once dominated entire regions faded within surprisingly short spans of time. One bad season could tip the balance, not immediately and not alone, but as part of a chain, a winter that arrived early, a summer that dried wetlands, a migration that failed to return. The giants required consistency. The land no longer offered it. Smaller predators and scavengers adapted more easily. They filled gaps left behind, adjusting diets and behavior. Humans, too, persisted through flexibility and cooperation. But the mega carnivores were bound to a world that was slipping away from them. Their decline was not sudden. It unfolded across generations, often unnoticed by those living within it. Each year brought small losses. Each decade narrowed options further. Eventually, resilience ran out. This is what it meant to live without margin. Power without flexibility becomes fragile. Strength without adaptability turns heavy. The very traits that once allowed giants to rule now anchored them to conditions that no longer held. The land did not turn against them, it simply changed. And in that change, the giants discovered that survival is not measured by dominance alone, but by the ability to endure uncertainty. By the time humans stepped onto this continent, the system they entered was already old. It had been shaped by climate, refined by predation, and held together by long memory written into migration paths and seasonal rhythms. Humans did not arrive at the beginning of this story, or even at its height. They arrived late, during a period of tightening margins, when the land was already adjusting to change. The timing mattered. Climate instability had begun to alter familiar patterns. Large prey moved differently than before. Some herds grew thinner, others shifted routes or fragmented. Predators adapted where they could, but many now lived closer to their limits. Into this narrowing world, small groups of humans moved carefully, following coastlines, river corridors, and open ground that offered visibility and resources. Humans did not enter as conquerors. They entered as one species among many, physically unremarkable in a land of giants. They lacked the speed of coursing predators, the strength of ambush hunters, and the size of animals that commanded space through mass alone. Their bodies carried no natural weapons capable of standing against the continent's dominant hunters. Vulnerability defined their early presence. A solitary human faced danger from nearly every direction. Predators that ignored other large animals would not hesitate to test a slow-moving, upright figure. Rivers offered no protection. Forests concealed threats. Open plains provided little refuge. Survival required constant awareness and restraint. Observation became their primary tool. Humans watched the land closely, learning the behavior of animals that had lived here far longer. They read tracks and disturbances. They noticed how herds paused before crossing water, how birds gathered after a kill, how predators avoided certain times and places. This attention allowed humans to move within the system without immediately disrupting it. Adaptation followed observation. Simple tools extended reach and reduced risk. Stone edges replaced teeth. Spears created distance. Fire offered warmth, light, and a measure of deterrence, though it also announced presence. These tools did not grant dominance. They offered options. Social structure mattered deeply. Humans survived through cooperation rather than strength. Groups shared vigilance, food, and knowledge. Tasks were divided. Risk was distributed. This allowed humans to persist in places where individuals alone would fail. Movement was cautious and deliberate. Humans avoided the densest predator territories when possible, following routes shaped by water and terrain. Camps were temporary. placed where visibility extended and escape remained possible. The land was never treated casually. Every site carried memory of danger. Over time, humans learned to exploit moments of weakness in the system, not through confrontation, but through patience. They targeted vulnerable individuals, young, injured, or isolated animals. They scavenged when safe. They waited out predators rather than challenging them. This approach mirrored the land's own rhythms. Importantly, humans did not immediately reshape the ecosystem. Their numbers were small, their technology was limited, their impact accumulated slowly. For a time, they fit into the existing structure, another pressure layered onto an already complex web. Yet their adaptability distinguished them. Humans could change behavior quickly. They adjusted diets, they altered movement patterns. Knowledge passed rapidly between generations. What one group learned spread to others. This flexibility allowed humans to persist as conditions continued to shift. Still, dominance remained far in the future. Humans lived within the reach of giants. They avoided conflict rather than seeking it. Survival depended on humility and learning rather than control. This early phase of human presence is often overlooked, yet it reveals something essential. Humans did not succeed because they were strongest. They succeeded because they were attentive. They listened to the land, learned its limits, and moved carefully within them. As climate continued to change and other species struggled to adjust, this adaptability would matter more and more. But at this moment in the story, humans were still newcomers, vulnerable, observant, adaptive. One thread among many in a system that had not yet realized it was beginning to change. As humans continued to move within this ancient system, their survival never depended on overpowering it. Strength alone offered no advantage here. The land was already filled with animals that embodied strength in ways no human body could match. Instead, humans endured by choosing a different path, one shaped by restraint, cooperation, and time. Tools were the first quiet shift. Stone edges, shaped patiently through repeated strikes, transformed ordinary materials into extensions of the human hand. These tools did not make humans stronger in a physical sense. They made effort more efficient. A sharp edge reduced the energy required to cut, scrape, or separate. Spears created distance between body and danger, allowing interaction with animals that would otherwise be unreachable. The power lay not in force, but in precision. Fire added another layer. It offered warmth in a cooling climate and light in long nights. It hardened wooden tools and made food easier to digest, returning more energy for less effort. Fire also reshaped space. Predators hesitated at its edge. Darkness retreated. Camps became islands of clarity within a landscape of uncertainty, yet fire demanded care. It consumed fuel, revealed location, and required constant attention. Humans learned to balance its benefits against its risks. Coordination transformed individual vulnerability into group resilience. Humans did not hunt alone. They watched for one another, shared tasks, and communicated through gesture and sound. When one individual tired, another took their place. Knowledge accumulated and moved through the group, preserved not in strength, but in memory. This collective awareness allowed humans to anticipate danger rather than react to it. Patience became a defining trait. Humans waited where other predators rushed. They observed herds over long periods, learning patterns of movement and rest. They allowed exhaustion, weather, and terrain to weaken prey before committing effort. In some cases, Humans arrived after predators had already made a kill, claiming what remained rather than challenging directly. Time did the work that muscle could not. Avoidance mattered as much as action. Humans learned which paths to take and which to abandon. They avoided river crossings during certain seasons. They moved through forests when wind favored silence. They rested where sightlines extended. This strategy reduced encounters rather than winning them. Survival came from minimizing risk, not confronting it. When conflict could not be avoided, humans relied on planning. They chose terrain carefully. Narrow spaces limited escape, but also controlled movement. Steep slopes slowed pursuit. Water became both barrier and tool when used with caution. Humans shaped encounters to favor coordination over brute force. This approach did not produce rapid dominance, it produced continuity. Human groups persisted in a land where many larger animals struggled. Their success was measured not in control, but in survival across generations. Importantly, humans did not dismantle the existing system immediately. Their numbers remained low, their tools improved gradually, their impact grew slowly. For a time, they were simply another adaptive presence, navigating an already strained ecosystem. What distinguished humans was flexibility. When conditions changed, they changed with them. Diets expanded, tools diversified, movement patterns adjusted, knowledge moved quickly between groups. This adaptability allowed humans to endure instability that challenged more specialized species. Strength remained useful, but it was not decisive. A strong individual still fell to ambush. A coordinated group endured. Fire did not defeat predators, it altered boundaries. Tools did not overpower giants, they extended reach. Patience did not remove danger, it reduced exposure. In this way, humans did not win by strength. They survived by refusing to compete on the same terms as the giants around them. They chose observation over confrontation, planning over impulse, and cooperation over dominance. As the climate continued to shift and the system grew more fragile, these traits would become increasingly important. But at this stage of the story, they simply allowed humans to remain present, quietly and carefully, in a world that still belonged to much larger forces. Human success did not come from breaking the rules of the land, it came from learning them and moving within their limits with respect and restraint. As the long story of the continent continued to unfold, strain gathered quietly. No single moment marked the turning point. There was no sudden collapse, no clear signal that the system had crossed a line. Instead, pressure accumulated from many directions at once, each influence subtle on its own, but powerful together. The climate continued its restless shifting. Ice advanced, retreated, and advanced again, never settling long enough for full recovery. Growing seasons shortened in some regions, then lengthened unevenly in others. Rain arrived at unfamiliar times. Cold lingered where warmth once returned reliably. These changes did not erase life, but they altered its rhythm, making the old patterns harder to follow. At the same time, large prey populations remained under strain. Reduced grazing windows weakened herds. Longer migrations demanded more energy. Calves were born into landscapes less forgiving than those their parents had known. Losses that once could be absorbed now echoed longer. Recovery slowed. Numbers thinned gradually, often unnoticed until absence became the most visible sign. Predators felt these changes immediately. Hunts required more effort. Encounters grew less predictable. Competition increased as territories overlapped more frequently. Some predators adapted by expanding ranges or shifting behavior, others could not. Their bodies, shaped for a steadier world, carried demands the land no longer met easily. Into this already stressed system, humans remained present. They were not yet overwhelming forces, but they added pressure simply by existing. They followed herds that were already moving farther. They took animals that predators relied on. They altered landscapes in small but meaningful ways, clearing paths, lighting fires, lingering in places once used only briefly. These actions were not malicious, they were survival strategies. Yet within a system already stretched thin, even small additions mattered. Each hunted animal represented lost energy for predators. Each altered route changed how herds moved. Each campfire reshaped behavior around it. What made this period especially fragile was the interaction of these pressures. Climate change alone had challenged ecosystems before. Predators and prey had adjusted. Humans alone, at low numbers, might have been absorbed into the system, but together, climate instability, human presence, and ecological specialization tightened constraints simultaneously. Specialization, once a strength, became a vulnerability. Animals adapted precisely to certain conditions struggled when those conditions shifted too quickly. Large predators dependent on large prey found fewer opportunities. Prey dependent on specific habitats found those habitats shrinking or fragmenting. Flexibility became the dividing line between persistence and decline. Energy flowed less freely. Kills were smaller or less frequent. Scavengers competed more intensely. Nutrients still cycled, but the pace slowed. Gaps appeared where abundance once filled space. The system continued to function, but closer to its limits than ever before. Nothing failed outright. Instead, resilience eroded. Each bad season left less room for recovery. Each loss reduced redundancy. Where once multiple species filled similar roles, now fewer remained. Balance persisted, but it was thinner, held together by fewer threads. For humans, this tightening world demanded continued adaptation. Cooperation deepened. Knowledge became more valuable. Groups learned to share space more carefully, to read the land more precisely, and to avoid unnecessary risk. Their flexibility allowed them to remain present even as others struggled. For the great predators and large prey, options narrowed. Choices that once worked no longer guaranteed survival. Timing became critical. A single poor season could cascade into long-term decline. Young failed to mature. Territories emptied slowly. This period did not feel like an ending to those living within it. Life continued. Births occurred. Hunts succeeded. Rivers flowed. Yet beneath this continuity, the system was changing character. It was no longer expansive. It was constrained. Pressure from all sides created a quiet inevitability, not one cause, but many, not one moment, but a gradual tightening that left less room for error with each passing generation. The continent still held power, but it was learning new limits. In this narrowing space, the long dominance of giants began to falter, not through defeat, but through accumulation. Change did not arrive as a single force. It arrived everywhere at once, pressing inward until even the strongest forms of life found themselves with nowhere left to lean. As pressure continued to build, the first changes did not arrive as silence, they arrived as absence. In places where certain predators had once been common, their signs grew faint. Tracks no longer crossed familiar ground. Bones accumulated more slowly. The land still moved, but something within it had begun to thin. The fossil record preserves this moment not as a sharp line, but as a pattern spread unevenly across time and space. Some predators vanished earlier in certain regions, while persisting longer in others. Others declined gradually, their remains appearing less frequently layer by layer, as if fading rather than falling. This staggered retreat tells a story of stress unfolding at different speeds across a vast continent. There was no single extinction event sweeping everything away at once. Instead, populations contracted, ranges shrank, strongholds became islands. A predator that once roamed freely across plains and valleys might survive only in pockets where prey remained reliable a little longer. These refuges held out briefly, then quietly emptied. The process was slow enough that life continued around it. Other animals adjusted. Smaller predators filled some gaps. Scavengers shifted patterns. Humans remained present, moving through landscapes that still felt alive, even as certain giants became rare sights rather than constants. This gradual decline left little room for dramatic endings. There were no final battles, no last stands recorded in stone. A species disappeared not because it lost suddenly, but because it could no longer recover. Each generation grew smaller, each season demanded more than the last. Eventually, births failed to replace deaths. Fossil layers reflect this uneven unraveling. In one place, the remains of a great predator end earlier than expected. In another, they persist long after nearby populations have vanished. This patchwork speaks to local conditions, differences in climate, prey availability, and human presence. It shows a system losing coherence rather than collapsing outright. As apex predators declined, the balance among those that remained shifted. Competition intensified briefly, then eased as numbers dropped. Some species disappeared without leaving clear traces of struggle. Others lingered, adapting where possible, then fading as conditions tightened further. What makes this phase difficult to see is its quietness. Extinction here was not a single moment, but a drawn-out process, stretched across generations. Individuals lived full lives even as their species moved toward disappearance. The land did not feel empty at first. It felt altered, subtly, in ways only time could reveal. Humans living during this period would not have known they were witnessing the loss of ancient lineages. They would have noticed changes, fewer encounters, longer travel to find familiar signs. But life continued. Seasons turned. Rivers flowed. The story did not announce its turning point. This slow unraveling challenges the idea that extinctions must be sudden or catastrophic. In this case, disappearance came through accumulation. Climate shifts reduced prey. Human activity added pressure. Specialization limited adaptation. None of these alone ended the giants. Together, over time, they narrowed survival until persistence was no longer possible. The first predators to vanish were often those with the least flexibility. Their bodies were masterpieces of a world that no longer existed. When conditions drifted beyond those designs, adaptation could not keep pace. Their decline did not reflect weakness, it reflected precision pushed too far. As these animals disappeared, the ecosystem continued to function, but differently. Energy pathways simplified. Fewer large kills occurred. Scavenging patterns changed. The land grew quieter in ways that would only become clear much later. This phase marks the beginning of an ending, though no one living within it could have known. It was not dramatic, it was gradual. A system that had endured for millions of years began to loosen, thread by thread. The story of these first disappearances reminds us that extinction is often a process, not an event. It unfolds slowly, quietly, and unevenly. By the time absence becomes obvious, the causes are already long at work, and the world has begun to move on without those who once shaped it. As the slow unraveling continued, a clear pattern emerged across the continent. The largest predators disappeared first, not because they were weakest, and not because they were suddenly outmatched, but because their lives were built on narrow foundations that no longer held. Size had once granted dominance. It allowed predators to challenge the largest prey, to claim space through presence alone, and to endure in a world shaped by danger. But size also came with commitments. Large bodies take time to grow and even more time to replace. The biggest predators did not produce many offspring, and they did not do so often. Years passed between generations. Young required long periods of care and learning before they could hunt successfully. Every loss mattered. When conditions were stable, this slow rhythm worked. Long lifespans balanced low birth rates. Knowledge accumulated. Territories remained familiar. But as climate shifts shortened feeding seasons and prey numbers thinned, recovery could not keep pace. A population reduced by even a small amount required generations to rebuild. When losses arrived repeatedly, there was no pause long enough for recovery to begin. Dependency deepened this vulnerability. The largest predators were not generalists. Their bodies were tuned to specific prey, animals large enough to justify the energy required to hunt them. When mammoths, giant bison, large horses, and other megafauna declined, alternatives did not easily replace them. Smaller prey could not sustain the same energy demands. Hunting them wasted effort. Competing for them increased risk. This dependency locked giants into a shrinking world. As megafauna populations fragmented or vanished from certain regions, the predators that relied on them followed, compressing into smaller territories. Competition intensified, encounters became more frequent, injury and starvation followed. Inflexibility sealed the outcome. Large predators had evolved for a particular version of the world, one with predictable prey movements, open space, and steady energy flow. Their hunting strategies, body plans, and social structures reflected that world precisely. When conditions changed too quickly, adaptation lagged behind reality. Smaller predators adjusted more easily. They shifted diets, altered group sizes, and moved into new niches. Humans adapted through learning and cooperation, but the giants could not change their needs without changing what they were. Evolution moved slowly, and the pace of environmental change outstripped it. The decline was uneven but consistent. The largest forms faded from region after region. Some lingered longer in places where prey persisted a little while longer. Others disappeared quickly once thresholds were crossed. Fossil layers show this pattern clearly, with the biggest species dropping out first, followed later by those with slightly more flexibility. This was not failure in a moral sense, it was mismatch. A system that had once supported giants no longer provided the conditions they required. Their precision became a liability. Their strength became weight. As these predators vanished, the ecosystem simplified. Energy pathways shortened. Fewer massive kills occurred. Scavengers adjusted. Smaller carnivores expanded. The land grew quieter, not empty, but changed. For humans, this shift altered risk in subtle ways. The most dominant hunters were gone or rare. Landscapes that once demanded constant avoidance opened slightly. But this came with new responsibilities and new imbalances that would unfold later. The fall of the giants was not sudden, and it was not caused by a single force. It was the result of low reproduction rates that could not replace loss, dependence on prey that no longer thrived, and inflexibility in a world that demanded constant adjustment. In the end, the biggest fell first, not because they were weak, but because they were exact. They were perfectly shaped for a world that had already begun to fade. As that world slipped away, it took with it the creatures most tightly bound to its former shape. The land continued on, carrying new forms of life forward. But the age of the giants ended quietly, leaving behind bones, altered landscapes, and a reminder that survival belongs not to the strongest, but to those who can bend without breaking when the world changes around them. As the largest predators faded from the land, dominance did not transfer cleanly from one ruler to another. It dissolved. The continent did not crown new masters. Instead, it entered a quieter phase where control loosened and the weight of authority lifted from the landscape. Apex predators had once shaped behavior simply by existing. Their presence organized movement, compressed herds, and carved invisible boundaries across plains and forests. When they declined, those pressures weakened. Smaller predators remained, but none carried the same reach or certainty. No single hunter could command entire regions through presence alone. This shift altered the structure of food webs. Where once many layers overlapped, now fewer remained. Energy moved through simpler paths. Large prey declined or vanished, and with them went the need for predators built to challenge immense bodies. Mid-sized carnivores increased in number, not because the land favored them more, but because competition eased and opportunity widened. Scavenging patterns changed as well. Fewer massive carcasses meant fewer gathering points that drew danger from every direction. Nutrients still returned to the soil, but in smaller pulses spread across time rather than concentrated in single events. The land fed itself more evenly, if less dramatically. Herbivores responded to this new quiet cautiously. Herds loosened, movement became less compressed. Animals grazed longer in one place, lingering where once they would have passed quickly. Vigilance remained, but it softened. Attention shifted from constant scanning for overwhelming threats to managing smaller risks more frequently. Landscapes reflected this behavioral change. Grasslands grew taller in places where grazing pressure eased. Shrubs and young trees gained footholds along riverbanks and open plains. Paths worn deep by repeated migrations softened as roots diversified. The land began to hold on to its growth a little longer. Rivers, too, changed character. Fewer forced crossings meant less panic-driven movement. Banks eroded differently. Wetlands expanded where trampling declined. The rhythm of water interacting with life shifted subtly, reshaping habitats without dramatic interruption. Predators that remained adapted to this new world. Wolves, coyotes, smaller cats, and bears learned to exploit flexibility rather than dominance. They hunted smaller prey, scavenged more opportunistically, and avoided unnecessary conflict. Cooperation replaced confrontation. Survival favored awareness and adjustment rather than force. Humans moved within this changing system with increasing ease. The disappearance of the largest predators reduced certain risks, but it also removed familiar signals. The land felt quieter, yet less predictable in other ways. New species expanded. Old behaviors no longer applied perfectly. Humans continued to observe, adapt, and learn. The end of dominance did not mean the end of danger. It meant a redistribution of it. Threats became more numerous but less overwhelming. Encounters became more frequent but less final. Life continued under pressure, but that pressure spread out rather than bearing down from above. This transition reshaped time itself, where once moments of extreme intensity punctuated long stretches of caution. Now life moved with steadier uncertainty. Seasons mattered more than singular events. Small changes accumulated significance. The system favored those who could respond continuously rather than those built for decisive encounters. Food webs simplified, but they did not weaken. They became more resilient in some ways, less dependent on a few massive players. Losses could be absorbed more easily. Recovery followed different paths. The land adjusted to its new shape. What vanished was not strength, but concentration of power. No single species dictated behavior across vast distances anymore. Control became shared, dynamic, and local. The continent no longer belonged to giants. This end of dominance was not an ending in the dramatic sense. It was a transformation. The land did not mourn, it adapted. The echoes of former rulers remained in bone and memory, but the living world moved forward with new rhythms. In this quieter phase, North America began to resemble the landscape more familiar today. Not safe, not gentle, but governed by smaller forces interacting constantly. The age of monsters did not collapse in fire or ice. It faded, leaving behind a world still dangerous, still alive, but forever changed by the absence of those who once held it in their grasp. With the age of dominance behind it, the continent settled into a new arrangement. Predation did not disappear, but it changed character. The world no longer favored creatures built for overwhelming force or vast control. Instead, it began to reward those that could adjust quickly, shift strategies, and live within narrower spaces without exhausting the land around them. Smaller carnivores were better suited to this quieter, more fragmented world. Wolves moved in flexible packs that could expand or contract depending on food availability. They hunted large prey when conditions allowed, but they also turned easily to smaller animals, scavenging, and even plant matter when necessary. This adaptability allowed them to persist through seasons of abundance and scarcity alike. Coyotes embodied flexibility even more fully. They were opportunists, comfortable alone or in loose groups, capable of surviving in open plains, forests, wetlands, and eventually human-altered landscapes. Their diets shifted with ease, ranging from rodents and birds to fruit and carrion. Where giants had required consistency, coyotes thrived on change. Bears also endured, though in altered forms. The massive bears of earlier ages faded, replaced by smaller species with broader diets and more conservative energy needs. These bears foraged widely, blending plant food with meat and scavenged remains. They moved between habitats easily, adjusting activity patterns to avoid conflict and conserve energy. Their strength remained, but it was no longer the defining trait of survival. In this new predator world, power mattered less than timing and choice. Hunts were shorter, risks were calculated carefully, animals avoided injury rather than courting it. Life favored those who could endure interruption and recover quickly rather than those that relied on a single decisive encounter. Food webs reflected this shift. Energy flowed through many small channels instead of a few large ones. Losses were absorbed more evenly. When one species declined, others filled parts of its role. The system gained resilience by spreading responsibility across many adaptable forms. Landscapes responded in subtle ways. Without the constant pressure of massive predators and prey, vegetation patterns stabilized differently. Grasslands still shifted, forests still grew and receded, but change came in smaller increments. The land held onto its structure longer, less prone to sudden disruption. For prey animals, this meant a different balance of risk. Danger remained present, but it was less overwhelming. Smaller predators required more frequent hunting, but their success rates were lower. Escape became possible more often. Vigilance remained important, but life unfolded with slightly more room to breathe. Humans fit easily into this adjusted system. The predators that remained posed threats, but not insurmountable ones. Cooperation, tools, and fire provided effective protection. Humans could coexist, avoid, and sometimes compete without the constant shadow of giants that had once ruled the land. This transition did not mark improvement or decline, it marked change. A system once defined by extreme forms shifted toward moderation. Flexibility replaced power as the central currency of survival. The echoes of the old world remained, bones beneath the soil, altered landforms, behavioral instincts shaped by long vanished threats. But the living surface of the continent told a new story, one of adjustment rather than dominance. Predators still hunted, prey still adapted, death still cycled life forward. But the scale had changed. The land no longer belonged to monsters. It belonged to those willing to adapt, to bend with shifting conditions rather than resist them. In this quieter predator world, survival favored awareness over aggression, patience over force, and cooperation over solitary power. The continent continued its long story, shaped not by what had been lost, but by what remained and learned to endure. As the last echoes of dominance faded, the continent entered a quieter phase, not empty, not peaceful in any simple sense, but altered in tone. The land no longer pulsed with the constant tension of massive bodies colliding and falling. The great, decisive moments that once reshaped entire valleys became rare. Life continued, but it did so with less violence concentrated in single places. Fewer large kills marked this change most clearly. The absence of mega carnivores meant fewer moments when enormous prey fell at once, fewer carcasses that fed entire communities in a single event. Death still occurred, but it arrived in smaller increments. A deer here, a bison there. Energy returned to the soil more gradually, spread across time instead of released in sudden abundance. This altered how animals moved and gathered. Scavengers no longer rushed from miles away toward a single signal in the sky. Instead, they worked patiently, following smaller signs, feeding briefly, then moving on. The dramatic gatherings that once drew danger from every direction faded into memory. The land learned a slower rhythm. With fewer massive predators, constant threat eased. Vigilance remained part of life, but it softened. Animals did not need to compress into tight formations at every moment. They lingered longer while feeding. They rested more openly. Movement became less hurried, less constrained by the need to avoid immediate catastrophe. This did not mean safety replaced danger. Smaller predators still hunted. Accidents still happened. Rivers still claimed lives. But the scale changed. Threats became localized rather than overwhelming. The land no longer demanded unbroken attention at every step. Behavior followed this shift. Herds spread out, paths diversified, animals explored areas once avoided because of concentrated risk. The landscape opened subtly, not through dramatic transformation, but through countless small choices made possible by reduced pressure. Plants responded as well. With fewer large disturbances, vegetation patterns stabilized. Grasslands grew thicker in places where trampling had eased. Young trees survived longer along riverbanks and plains. The land held its shape differently, less sculpted by urgency, more guided by slow growth. For humans, this quieter world felt different underfoot. Travel required less constant avoidance. Camps could remain in one place a little longer. The absence of the largest predators reduced the intensity of risk, though not the need for awareness. Humans adjusted naturally, as they always had, reading the land as it changed. Sound itself altered. The night held fewer deep silences broken by distant struggle. Calls traveled farther without interruption. The sky remained watchful, but gatherings were smaller. The continent breathed more evenly. This silence was not an ending, it was a transition. The land was still alive with movement and interaction, but the age of constant dominance had passed. The echoes of that time remained only in traces, in instincts shaped by dangers no longer present. Over generations, this quieter continent shaped new expectations. Animals born into this world inherited caution, but not fear tuned to giants. Their behavior reflected a land where danger existed, but did not press from all sides at once. The system continued to function, now driven by many small interactions rather than a few overwhelming ones. Energy cycled steadily. Losses were absorbed more easily. The land felt less strained. In this silence, North America became something new, not gentle, not tame, but less burdened by extremes. The monsters were gone, and with them went the constant reminder of how close life once lived to the edge. What followed was not emptiness, but space. Space for adjustment, space for new relationships to form, space for the land to remember itself differently. The silence that followed was not absence, it was release. Even as the land grew quieter, the past did not vanish with the creatures that shaped it. It remained beneath the surface, preserved in stone and sediment, waiting patiently. Fossils became the final witnesses of a world that no longer existed, holding traces of danger long after the sounds of it had faded. Bones recovered from ancient ground carry marks that speak without words. Grooves pressed deep into hardened tissue reveal where teeth once closed with force. Some bite marks match the spacing and curvature of known predators, fitting like signatures left behind in bone. Others show crushing damage, fractures formed not by decay or time, but by immense pressure applied while the animal was still alive. These marks are not random. They tell of encounters measured in seconds, moments when survival narrowed to strength, position, and chance. More revealing still are the bones that healed. Scars of injury show where flesh was torn, where bone cracked, and where life continued anyway. Limbs fused imperfectly after breaks. Ribs thickened around old fractures. Teeth were worn unevenly from years of use after damage. These animals did not live easy lives. They carried wounds forward, adapting to pain and limitation in a world that offered no pause for recovery. A healed injury meant endurance. It meant an animal survived an attack, escaped a hunt, or endured a fall during flight. It also meant returning to a life where injury increased risk. A limp slowed escape. A damaged jaw reduced feeding efficiency. Survival after injury required persistence and luck, traits honed by constant pressure. These signs appear across species. Prey animals bear marks of near misses, claws raked across bone, teeth that slid instead of closed fully. Predators show injuries as well, broken teeth from struggling prey, damaged limbs from kicks or falls. Even the most dominant hunters were not immune. Every encounter carried cost. Fossil beds sometimes preserve multiple individuals together, their remains mingled. These sites suggest moments where danger clustered, river crossings gone wrong, hunts that drew many bodies into the same place. In these layers, the story of relentless risk becomes clearer. Death was rarely solitary. It rippled outward, affecting many lives at once. The spacing of fossils across time reinforces this picture. Injuries appear consistently, not only during periods of instability, but throughout the long reign of these ecosystems. Danger was not an anomaly, it was routine. The land did not soften with familiarity, it demanded attention every day. What fossils do not show is fear or exhaustion, but they imply both. A healed bone speaks of days spent compensating, adjusting movement, relying on others, or changing habits. It speaks of a body adapting under pressure rather than surrendering. These silent records reveal resilience shaped by constant threat. For humans, these fossils became lessons long after the danger had passed. They showed that the world they inherited was not always quiet. Beneath familiar soil lay evidence of a harsher rhythm, one where survival was earned repeatedly rather than assumed. The absence of fossils can be as telling as their presence. Gaps appear where once there were many remains. Layers thin, species vanish. Together with injury patterns, these absences complete the story of a system that demanded much and gave little margin. Fossils remind us that extinction did not erase struggle, it preserved it. Every mark left behind is a fragment of lived experience, a record of movement, impact, and endurance. The land remembers even when the living forget. Today, when bones are lifted gently from ancient ground, they carry the weight of that memory. They reveal a continent once shaped by relentless danger, where survival was provisional and adaptation constant. They show that the monsters of North America were not myths amplified by imagination. They were real, measured, and tested by a world that never stopped applying pressure. In this way, fossils do more than record death. They tell the story of life lived under tension, of bodies shaped by risk, and of a land that asked everything of those who moved across it. When the word monsters is used to describe the ancient predators of North America, it can sound like exaggeration, a dramatic label placed on creatures made larger by imagination. Yet the evidence left behind tells a quieter, more convincing story. These animals do not need myth to amplify them. Measurement alone is enough. Bones record strength with precision. Limb thickness reveals how much force muscles once applied. Joint surfaces show how weight was carried and distributed. Bite marks preserve the pressure of jaws meeting bone. When scientists reconstruct these bodies, the numbers speak plainly. The forces involved exceed those of any land predators alive today, not by a small margin, but by orders that reshape how power is understood. Some predators could deliver bites strong enough to crack dense bone repeatedly without damaging their own teeth. Others could subdue prey many times their own mass through grip and leverage alone. These abilities are not guessed, they are inferred from fracture patterns, muscle attachment scars, and the mechanical limits of bone itself. The anatomy leaves little room for interpretation. Behavior, too, is documented. Trackways show coordinated movement, multiple individuals traveling together with purpose. Fossil sites preserve the remains of prey surrounded by predators, evidence of cooperative hunting or contested kills. Tooth wear patterns reveal repeated use, not occasional success. Healed injuries on predators show they survived violent encounters again and again, suggesting frequent close contact with dangerous prey. Prey behavior reinforces this picture. Defensive adaptations appear extreme by modern standards. Thickened bones, reinforced joints, armored hides, and massive body size did not evolve without reason. These traits cost energy. They persist only when pressure is relentless. The existence of such defenses confirms the intensity of the threats that shape them. Reality becomes even clearer when these pieces are placed together. A predator capable of immense force, hunting in a landscape filled with prey that evolved to resist impact, suggests a world where encounters were not rare or avoidable. They were expected, Survival depended on meeting danger repeatedly and enduring it. Modern comparisons often fail because nothing living today fills the same roles. African lions, bears, and wolves operate in ecosystems already simplified by extinction. Their prey is smaller, their range is fragmented, their competition reduced. Measuring Ice Age predators against modern ones is like comparing shadows to the objects that cast them. This does not mean ancient predators were reckless or constantly violent. Precision mattered, energy had to be conserved. But when conflict occurred, it was decisive. The forces involved were sufficient to end lives quickly, not through prolonged struggle, but through overwhelming capability applied at the right moment. Myth often portrays monsters as chaotic or mindless. The reality was the opposite. These animals were finely tuned, disciplined, and effective. Their strength was not wild. It was controlled, shaped by millions of years of selection. That control is what made them so formidable. The word monster also carries emotional weight, suggesting something beyond normal experience. In that sense, it fits. These creatures existed outside the range of what humans have known in recorded history. Their absence today does not diminish their reality, it highlights it. The land once supported beings that exceeded our everyday understanding of danger and power. Fossils do not exaggerate, they do not embellish, they record dimensions, forces, and outcomes. When those records are read carefully, they describe animals that deserve the word monster, not as insult or fantasy, but as description. These were not creatures inflated by fear or storytelling. They were products of a world capable of sustaining extremes. Their disappearance does not mean they were mistakes. It means the conditions that shaped them no longer exist. Calling them monsters is not a failure of scientific restraint. It is an acknowledgement that reality, at times, surpasses imagination. The ancient predators of North America were not legends created by myth. They were facts created by the land itself, measured in bone, preserved in stone, and powerful enough that even now, long after their silence, they still command attention. The world that once supported monsters depended on conditions that no longer exist together. It was not only the presence of powerful animals that made that age possible, but the structure of the planet itself. When those structures shifted, the world they sustained could not return in the same form. Modern ecosystems operate under tighter limits. Landscapes today are smaller in functional scale, even when they appear vast on maps. Migration routes are fragmented, rivers are constrained, grasslands are interrupted by forests, roads, and cities. The open, continuous spaces that once allowed energy to move freely across thousands of kilometers no longer function as single systems. Productivity has changed as well. Ice Age North America supported enormous herds because climate, soil, and vegetation aligned over long periods. Plant growth followed predictable cycles, returning reliably year after year. That steady output fed large bodies and sustained slow reproduction. Modern climates are more volatile, and human activity has further altered soil, water, and nutrient flow. Energy still moves through ecosystems, but it does so unevenly and often inefficiently. Large predators require surplus, not abundance alone, but excess beyond immediate needs. They depend on prey populations large enough to absorb losses without collapsing and stable enough to recover between hunting seasons. Today, most ecosystems operate close to their limits. Large herbivores are fewer, more closely managed, and often restricted to protected areas. The surplus that once fed monsters has been replaced by balance maintained through constraint. What is missing is scale combined with patience. Evolution needs time without interruption. The ancient predators were shaped over millions of years in landscapes that changed slowly enough for bodies and behavior to keep pace. Modern environments change rapidly. Climate shifts occur within centuries. Human pressures alter habitats within decades. Evolution cannot refine giants under those conditions. Human presence itself changes the equation. Even without direct conflict, humans reshape ecosystems simply by occupying space. Fire regimes shift, prey behavior changes. Movement patterns adapt to avoid disturbance. Large predators are forced into narrower niches where risk outweighs reward. Coexistence at the scale required for monsters becomes impossible. There is also a missing cultural layer within ecosystems. Ancient prey species carried instincts shaped by constant pressure from giant predators. Herding, vigilance, and migration patterns evolved together with danger. When predators disappeared, those behaviors softened or vanished. Reintroducing giants into a world that no longer remembers them would not restore balance. It would create mismatch. Modern predators reflect this change. Wolves, bears, and big cats persist because they are flexible. They adjust diets, territories, and social structures quickly. They survive in fragments. Giants could not. Their bodies demanded commitment from the land that the land can no longer give. Even if conditions aligned briefly, they would not remain stable long enough. A world capable of sustaining monsters requires long continuity. It requires uninterrupted energy flow, vast connected landscapes, and prey populations allowed to fluctuate naturally without constant intervention. These conditions are absent. What remains instead is a quieter strength. Modern ecosystems favor resilience over dominance. They support many small interactions rather than a few overwhelming ones. This does not make them weaker. It makes them different. The absence of monsters is not a failure of nature. It is a reflection of change. The planet moved on. Life adjusted. New balances formed. The ancient world was not better. It was harsher, heavier, and less forgiving. It demanded constant attention and offered little margin for error. Its giants were extraordinary because the land itself was extraordinary. Today's world tells another story, one of adaptability, fragmentation, and restraint. The monsters belong to a moment when Earth could afford extremes. That moment passed quietly, and with it went the conditions that made monsters possible. What humans inherited was not the throne once held by giants. It was something quieter, heavier, and more complex. As the age of monsters faded, humans did not step into a role of dominance in the old sense. They stepped into a position of influence, one defined by control rather than raw power, and by responsibility rather than command. Control emerged slowly. It did not arrive as mastery over every landscape, but as the ability to shape outcomes. Fire altered vegetation and movement. Tools changed how animals were hunted and processed. Cooperation allowed humans to decide when to engage and when to withdraw. These choices did not make humans the strongest presence on the land, but they made them the most flexible. Unlike the giants before them, humans were not bound to a single strategy. They could pause, adapt, and change direction. Where ancient predators relied on physical authority to structure ecosystems, humans influenced them through behavior. Small decisions repeated over time reshaped migration routes, feeding grounds, and even the timing of life cycles. This kind of control carried weight. It meant that actions echoed beyond the moment. A fire lit to clear land affected soil and water years later. A hunting strategy altered prey behavior across generations. Camps placed along rivers shifted how animals approached water. Humans learned, sometimes slowly and painfully, that influence did not end when an action was complete. With influence came responsibility, even before it was fully understood. As large predators disappeared, humans became one of the primary forces shaping balance, not alone, but significantly. The land no longer absorbed pressure without consequence. Choices mattered more because fewer forces remained to counter them. Responsibility did not mean harmony. Humans still struggled, failed, and adapted imperfectly, but they carried forward something new: the ability to decide restraint, to stop hunting when populations thinned, to move rather than exhaust a place. These choices were not always made, but the capacity existed. Unlike dominance, which demands constant assertion, control can be quiet. It can be exercised through absence as much as action. Leaving space became as important as claiming it. Allowing recovery mattered as much as taking resources. This inheritance also changed how humans related to the land. Fear shifted into awareness, all replaced constant vigilance. The world was still dangerous, but no longer ruled by overwhelming force from a few directions. Humans could observe patterns, anticipate change, and respond with intention. Yet this role came with risk. Without giants to enforce balance through fear and pressure, imbalance could grow unnoticed. Overuse could spread quietly. Loss could accumulate before becoming obvious. Humans inherited not only opportunity, but accountability. The land did not grant permission, it responded. When pressure grew too great, systems weakened. When restraint was practiced, recovery followed. This feedback loop became the new teacher. Inheriting control meant inheriting consequence. Every decision carried forward. The world remembered. This shift marked a profound change in Earth's story. For the first time, a species could influence ecosystems at scale without relying on physical dominance. That power did not make humans monsters. It made them caretakers, whether they recognized the role or not. The ancient predators shaped the land through presence. Humans shape it through persistence. Their impact accumulates not through force, but through continuity. What humans inherited instead of monsters was not safety, it was stewardship, not mastery, but obligation. The responsibility to notice limits, to understand balance, and to act with awareness in a world that no longer resets itself through overwhelming natural power. This inheritance remains unfinished. It continues to unfold with every generation. The land still responds, quietly and patiently, to how control is exercised. The age of monsters ended. The age of responsibility began. Even after the monsters vanished and the rhythms of life softened, the land did not forget what it had been. Memory remained, not as stories or legends, but as structure. Beneath modern surfaces, the continent still carries the shape of its former dangers, layered quietly under time. Ancient hunting grounds now lie beneath cities, places once chosen for visibility. Access to water and movement corridors became foundations for roads, neighborhoods, and bridges. Long before concrete and steel, these sites drew life for the same reasons they do today. They offered predictable passage, reliable resources, and control over space. Beneath pavement and buildings, stone tools sometimes emerge, worn smooth by hands that learned the land carefully. These tools are often found where prey once gathered, near river bends, valley openings, and natural bottlenecks. Humans did not choose these places at random. They followed patterns already written by animals moving through landscapes shaped by predation. Modern cities echo these ancient decisions. Highways trace migration routes. Rail lines follow valleys once carved by hooves and feet. Even urban boundaries often reflect terrain shaped by water and movement long before people named it. The land guided settlement, just as it once guided hunts. Rivers hold especially deep memory. Today they appear calm, framed by banks and crossings, but many of these waters were once among the most dangerous places on the continent. Crossing a river meant exposure. Prey hesitated at the edge. Predators waited in concealment. Currents hid danger beneath reflection. For thousands of years, rivers killed routinely, not through malice, but through opportunity. Animals weakened by migration entered water that slowed escape. Visibility dropped. Movement became constrained. Ambush favored those adapted to strike from concealment. Even without predators, strong currents and cold claimed lives. The remains of these encounters still rest in river sediments, bones carried downstream, tools lost during crossings, layers of silt preserving moments when movement ended abruptly. These waterways were not just sources of life, they were filters deciding which bodies passed and which did not. Today, bridges span these same rivers. We cross them without pause, often unaware of the long history beneath the surface. Yet the river has not changed its nature. It still shapes movement. It still demands respect. Floods remind us occasionally of its power, echoing a time when water decided survival daily. The land remembers through habit. Animals still follow old paths even when obstacles intervene. Deer pause at crossings their ancestors once feared. Predators patrol edges shaped by ancient prey behavior. These instincts persist, softened but not erased. Even vegetation carries memory. Certain plants thrive where soil was once disturbed repeatedly by hooves and feet. Others cluster along paths that once saw constant movement. The land responds to patterns long after their original causes fade. Human history layered itself gently onto this foundation. Settlements grew where survival had once demanded attention. Markets formed where animals once gathered. Conflict and cooperation followed terrain shaped by ancient danger. The past did not vanish, it guided. This memory does not mourn, it does not warn, it simply exists, shaping what comes next. The land does not reset itself when an era ends, it accumulates. Walking through modern streets, it is possible to stand above places where the balance of life once hinged on seconds, where predators waited, where prey hesitated, where humans learned caution before confidence. These moments are gone, but their imprint remains. The continent still remembers the age of monsters, not as spectacle, but as structure, in the way rivers bend, in the way valleys open, in the way movement gathers and funnels. The past lives quietly beneath the present, steady and patient. Nothing truly erased that world, it was layered over. And beneath everything we build, the land still holds the shape of what once ruled it. For most of Earth's history, safety was not a feature of the landscape. It was not expected, planned for, or guaranteed. It was brief, local, and easily lost. The calm environments many people experience today are not the default condition of the planet. They are a recent development, layered carefully over a far more demanding past. In the ancient world, survival required constant attention. Landscapes were not designed to protect life, but to test it. Food was unevenly distributed. Shelter shifted with seasons. Danger came not only from predators, but from weather, terrain, and water itself. To move across the land was to accept risk as a daily companion. Animals lived with this reality fully. Their bodies carried the record of it in thick bones, powerful muscles and behaviors tuned to vigilance. Rest was shallow, movement was cautious, even moments of abundance carried threat because abundance attracted attention. Humans emerged within this context. Early human life was shaped by environments where mistakes carried immediate consequence. A misjudged crossing, a poorly chosen campsite, a moment of distraction, any of these could end a life. Knowledge was survival. Memory mattered. Calm was temporary. Over time, humans learned to reduce some of this danger. Fire softened cold. Tools extended reach. Cooperation spread risk across groups. Later still, agriculture stabilized food supply. Settlements grew, boundaries formed. Gradually, the constant pressure eased. But this easing is recent when viewed against deep time. For millions of years before it, the land demanded resilience, not comfort. Even after the disappearance of the great predators, danger remained woven into daily existence. Smaller threats replaced larger ones. Disease, hunger, and exposure continued to shape lives. What we now recognize as safe landscapes required layers of change: controlled water, managed vegetation, protected movement. These conditions did not arise naturally. They were built slowly through trial, loss, and adaptation. They depend on continuous maintenance. Calm landscapes are new not only in form, but in feeling: silence without threat, open spaces without constant vigilance, nights where rest does not require guarding. These experiences would have been rare for most of history. Even today, safety is uneven. It exists where systems function and fades quickly where they fail. Floods, fires, and storms remind us that the land has not forgotten its older rhythms. Beneath order, the ancient forces remain. The quiet we experience now can create distance from this past. It can make ancient danger feel exaggerated or symbolic, but the evidence tells otherwise. Fossils, landscapes, and behavior patterns all point to a world where life endured pressure constantly. Recognizing that safety is recent does not diminish the present. It gives it context. It shows how unusual calm truly is, how much effort it took to achieve, how fragile it remains. The monsters of the past were not aberrations. They were products of a world where survival favored extremes. Their absence today reflects a change in conditions, not an error in nature. As the land softened, so did expectations. What once required constant alertness now feels normal. This shift shapes how we understand danger, risk, and responsibility. The story of Earth is not a march toward comfort. It is a series of adjustments. Calm emerges briefly, held in place by balance and effort. Safety, in this sense, is not a permanent state. It is an agreement between life and environment, renewed continuously. The landscapes we walk today carry this history quietly. Beneath calm surfaces lie the traces of a harsher world. Knowing this does not disturb the peace, it deepens it. Safety is a recent invention and one worth understanding. As this long story settles into its final quiet, it becomes clear that the end of the monsters was not a failure of life, strength, or design. The giants of North America did not disappear because they were flawed. They vanished because the world that shaped them moved on. For millions of years, these animals were not exceptions. They were answers. Their bodies, behaviors, and power matched the demands of a continent built on abundance and danger. They thrived because the land supported extremes. When conditions were right, nothing about them was excessive. But the world does not stand still. Climate shifted, landscapes fractured, energy flows tightened. What once worked perfectly began to ask more than the land could give. The monsters did not lose their place dissolved. This change unfolded slowly enough that no single moment marks the end. There was no final season when dominance vanished completely. Instead, each generation carried a little less certainty than the one before. The land grew quieter not through catastrophe, but through adjustment. North America changed with this transition. The disappearance of giants reshaped movement, sound, and expectation. The land learned new rhythms, food webs simplified, behavior softened, new forms of life found room to persist. Humans entered this transformed world and inherited its consequences. Not control over nature, but influence within it. Not dominance, but responsibility. The continent no longer enforced balance through overwhelming force. It relied on restraint, adaptation, and awareness. Looking back, it is tempting to frame the monsters as symbols of loss or grandeur, but they were not meant to last forever. No form is. They were expressions of a particular moment in Earth's long story, one defined by scale and intensity. Their absence does not diminish the present, it explains it. The quieter landscapes we know are shaped as much by what is gone as by what remains. Beneath calm surfaces lies a deep history of endurance and change. The land still carries the memory of that age. In rivers, valleys, and ancient pathways, traces of former danger persist, but memory is not return. The conditions that allowed monsters to rule do not exist anymore. This is not a tragedy, it is continuity. Life does not move toward comfort or spectacle, it moves toward what works now. The monsters worked once, then something else did. North America today is not safer because the past was wrong. It is safer because the world changed and life changed with it. The continent adapted, shedding extremes that no longer fit its shape. In this way, the story comes to rest, not with loss, but with understanding. The monsters did not fail. The world changed, and North America changed with it. So now take a deep breath. Let your shoulders loosen. The land beneath us is quiet now, but it is still alive with memory, still carrying the long story forward, one gentle moment at a time.